So 2025 is going to be the year where we reset speed records on all of the project trucks that we have on the channel. We actually just finished up phase one, the naturally aspirated LS swap on the second gen Cyclone, and that's going to get supercharged in short order. In fact, if all goes according to plan, it's going to be a pretty big supercharger. But today we're actually going to be throwing some much needed upgrades at the project truck that actually started this channel, my turbo big block Silverado. Now, if you're new around here, you probably haven't even seen the UglyTruck, because last summer I didn't even really get to the track with it at all. And I really just drove it around town a couple of times, which is a ton of fun because the turbo big block will absolutely shred the tires in pretty much any gear. But there's a lot of power and speed left on the table, and we want to extract it today, or at least start the project anyway. Right now, it's a stock, more or less, 8.1 liter big block that we swapped in when we first bought this truck. And really the only upgrades that we've done on the inside are, a higher performance camshaft, a few valve springs, rockers, and stuff like that. But for the most part, it's a stock engine. It does have an 80mm turbo on the side, and we built this whole turbo kit back in the fall of 2020, and it's been running good, but it's just a little bit too restrictive, I believe. It's done a best power number on the dyno of 817 at the wheels. With 1,100 pounds of torque, which is awesome. And it's done the best quarter mile run of 1092 at 125 miles an hour. But the one thing I've noticed as I've tested this truck is pretty much anything more than like 16 or 17 pounds of boost has zero net effect on power. It will not go any faster. I'm pretty sure the turbo is just too small, even though it is an 80mm. So it's going to get a larger turbo, it's going to get some better cylinder heads, and possibly even a different intake manifold. We got a lot of upgrades that we're going to be throwing at it today, or we're starting, like I mentioned. So let's jump right in. Let's tear this big block apart and make some more power. All right, so the first thing that we're going to tear down is basically get the turbo kit off. I'm not going to pull the engine out, it's going to stay in for this, but everything pretty much is coming off it. So intake, heads, cooling system, turbo, of course. So that's where we're going to get started with the turbo. This turbo is too small for this engine by itself, but I might buy another one just like this and use it as a twin setup for the 535 in the race truck. Maybe. I think that'd be about right. I don't know why they put 22 miles of wire on these wide bands. I'm pretty sure I've said it before, but my goal is to run a 9-second quarter mile with a stock bottom end. And I think it's doable. It'll be tough, but I think it'll be doable. I don't know what it was, but something melted on there. Like electrical tape, maybe. I remember when I built this, it was kind of a goal to make everything as big a pieces as possible. We did. We got one side or one piece charge pipes. Yeah, just taking a little bit of like Tetris to snake it out, but it's all in one piece. Oh, there we go. Heavy. Yeah, it's heavy and warm. Just like a game of Tetris. All right, just discovered a little oil drip, which is kind of new, so I want to find out real quick what it is. I think it's just an oil pan, which on a two-wheel drive is actually pretty easy to fix. So we'll add that to the list of things to take care of. Okay, so one of the reasons why I'm glad we're actually doing this repair is because if you remember last fall, we repaired a cracked water jacket on these cylinder heads. Not the best repair in the world, it was JB Weld, and I thought it was going to be a good sort of long-term repair, which if you look in here, it sort of worked, but is just starting to leak right there. That's a little bit of coolant coming out. So it sort of worked, but definitely not a long-term fix. So another good reason why we're putting new heads on. Definitely not a lightweight manifold. Show me. One of the things I was worried about when I first built this is because I welded not iron pipe, but I welded these Schedule 40 weld pipes to this cast manifold. I was worried it was going to crack, but it's held up. 5 years of abuse. All right. Oh no! Come back. Got it. Almost went into the socket swimming pool. Tell you what, I love these electric fans. They're big, but they move a ton of air. And they're cheap from a junkyard. All right, so it's day 2, and yesterday we're actually able to make quite a bit of progress on the teardown. We got most of the, call them external accessories to the engine removed. Got the fuel lines off, the radiator hoses, the heater lines, obviously all the turbo stuff is gone. And we're just left with more or less a bare block. And by the end of the day, we should have the rest of the teardown complete. But I figured I ought to kind of give you guys a little bit of a glimpse into my thought process and what my goals are for this phase of the project. And really it's simple. I just want to maintain and build upon what I'm going to call the spirit of the UglyTruck. Now, this was never intended to be a full-blown, unlimited budget race vehicle. It was really intended just to be a fun street truck with a unique engine combination that not a lot of people use. And as we continue to push the boundaries, call it, of the 8.1, the more I realize this engine platform is extremely capable. In fact, much more capable than people give it credit. And we still haven't found the limits. Now, I do have another project that is kind of going on in the background. You guys haven't seen it for a long time, but the 4-wheel drive drag truck, that one is meant to be more on the quote-unquote full-blown race side of things. That has a Gen 7 big block, just like the UglyTruck, but it's made entirely of aftermarket parts. It has a different block, different crank, rods, pistons. It's got a solid roller camshaft. It's got some aluminum cylinder heads and a whole bunch of more exotic goodies. So that one's going to be hopefully 17 to 1800 horsepower, where the UglyTruck, I really want to just keep the stock bottom end just because I want to see what it can do. Now, who knows what the future will hold, but I still believe and am convinced that we can run a 9-second quarter-mile pass on the stock bottom end, but we do need some airflow upgrades to get there, and that's what today is all about. So basically the recipe is simple. We're going to be installing different cylinder heads. Those have already showed up, and I'll show you guys those in a minute here. We're probably going to be installing a different intake manifold and throttle body, but I am robbing those parts from the 535 build, so I'm going to have to probably get a second intake manifold at some point. And definitely we're going to be installing a bigger turbocharger, but that's pretty much it for now. And with those few upgrades, I think this truck will be a lot faster than it was before. And with maybe a few other chassis upgrades, we can hit that 9-second pass. And I know chasing dyno numbers and chasing quarter-mile times is a slippery slope, and it can get expensive. But for now, I think we're off to a good start. In the future, later on this summer, probably we'll have to change to a different torque converter. The stock rear end at some point will probably give us trouble, but that's hanging in there also. But that's really what we're after today, is we're just building upon the spirit of the Ugly Truck, and we're going to make it faster while still keeping it sort of budget oriented, you know, sort of street oriented, and we just want a fun truck that's fast. That almost went down the exhaust. That would not have been good. Oh, forgot the ground. All right, I'm really happy right now because it's breakfast burrito day and the guys just approved, so we'll have a good lunch. Tell you what, you work on iron big blocks all day, there's no need to go to a gym. All right, as long as I don't slip, I think I'll be okay. Oh, feet coming off the ground. All right, so it's a couple days later and we have all the teardown work done, and thankfully we didn't find any surprises inside here, which I didn't think we would because this thing ran so good. So bottom end, 100% stock other than the cam, but piston rod, crank, block, all factory stuff, and it's gonna stay that way because that is the spirit of the Ugly Truck, is what we're gonna call it. I'm trying to see what we can do on junkyard parts. The cam that's in here, it is an aftermarket cam. It shares, oddly enough, it shares almost identical specs to the cam that we put in the 5.3 in the second gen Cyclone. But because instead of a 5.3, this is an 8.1 liter engine, effectively the cam is a little bit smaller, but it's still gonna work for what we have in mind, for our goals for this thing. The only thing that I found that I didn't really count on was the rocker arms. We did have an aftermarket rocker in here, just an inexpensive Chinese one. And unfortunately, the trunnions on these things are kind of locking up. They haven't seized altogether, but they're very, very stiff. So we're going to replace those with some of the Comp Gold aluminum rockers. That'll work with the valve spring package that we have. So that's the only other unknown that we have found, which I'll take all day long. So let me show you what we're putting on top of this thing, because remember, the name of the game is more air in, more air out, and more turbo. So this is the cylinder head that we're going to be running. It's the Raylar big power cylinder head for the 8.1. They're not completely different, but they won't interchange with the old school big blocks that you guys may be used to, you know, the Gen 6, the Mark 5, and so on. Cathedral ports just like an LS. That's why sometimes people call this a big block LS. But the Raylar heads are made from aluminum, which means they are much lighter than these boat anchors over here. I think these are right at 100 pounds a piece. They're a pain to work with. They have tiny valves. They have a really, really poorly designed or flowing intake port. They've got these I believe have a 114 cc chamber, where the Raylar heads, they have a 107 cc chamber. So our compression ratio should bump to, I believe, 9.6 to 1. Still boost friendly, but higher than the 9.0 to 1 that those heads would have provided. They flow, I think, around 350 CFM. I'll put the right numbers up on the screen. 350 CFM for the intake. I can't remember the exhaust, but bigger valves, lighter weight, better construction, better flow. There's going to be a lot of power freed up just by installing the cylinder heads, but we're not going to stop there. The intake manifold was the other part that I was kind of debating about upgrading or not, because we have already modified the stock intake a little bit. I'll put some footage up on the screen, but basically we cut the bottom of it out. There's a couple of baffles in there that we were able to cut away and do some porting basically and weld it back together. And that will help free up some horsepower, but it still has the stock truck-sized 78mm throttle body opening. It has an incredibly long intake runner, which makes great low-speed torque, but when it comes to what we're doing, which is more of the high-performance side of things, it just doesn't breathe like the Gen 7R intake from Raylar. Now, I happen to have one, but it was intended to go on my 535 cubic inch drag motor, which is going in the other truck. So I was debating about whether or not I should just put it on this truck, but I think I'm gonna, because it has the bigger throttle body opening, bigger plenum volume, shorter runners. It's gonna flow a whole lot better, and it's just gonna be suited for what we're trying to do here. So I'm just gonna buy another intake for the other truck, and then we'll get this one set up with the Gen 7R intake. And then finally, the last piece of the puzzle is the boosty boy, the turbo, whatever you want to call it. This is the old one. This is a VS Racing S400, S480. So it's a S400 chassis turbo, has an 80mm compressor wheel, just the cast version, standard cover, and it has the 9688 turbine on it. This is just kind of standard S400 stuff. This would be perfect on like a 5.3 or something like that, or even it worked great on the 8.1 up to 15 pounds of boost, but we're trying to push things further. We need a little bit more turbo. So we got one. This also is a VS Racing. I like them. They're durable, they're inexpensive, and it's gonna fit the bill. It's an S485, so 5 mil bigger on the compressor wheel. It does have the billet wheel this time instead of cast, and it has the race cover, which has this stuff in here, which is supposed to flow a little bit more. And then on the exhaust side of things, most S400s of this class have the same 9688 turbine, but this one I found, they only had a couple of them, but this has the 10292 turbine on it, so it'll flow a lot more on the exhaust side of things. It'll free up some of that restriction that we're fighting, and it's going to help produce a lot more power. It's not that I necessarily needed a ton more compressor wheel, but I needed the restriction freed up on the exhaust, but we're scaling the turbo intake and exhaust side kind of equally. So this is what we're going to be running. When I designed the turbo kit, I knew that eventually I'd be putting a bigger turbo on. So it still has the same T6 inlet on the turbine. It still has the same 5-inch Marmon V-band outlet. It still has the same V-band on the compressor discharge. The only thing I'm going to have to change to get this guy in there is just a little bit bigger air filter, which I'll take it. We could probably swing an air filter, and that turbo with the heads, with the intake, it's going to free up a lot of restriction that this junkyard 8.1 has, and still sort of allow us to keep the spirit of the 8.1. I mean, I have debated again, just taking the whole 535 and throwing it in the UglyTruck, but that's not what we're all about. This is a junkyard truck, this is a sport truck, and it's gonna make a 9-second quarter mile pass this summer, guys. Thank you for watching. Come back soon.